She hosted family dinner every Sunday. Perfect roast, polished silver, a mother's ritual, until she caught her son watching her wine glass a little too closely, so she made a quiet switch and watched her daughter-in-law collapse. Now secrets are unraveling, whispers of poison, control, and betrayal buried in bloodlines. Because when your own child wants you dead, survival isn't the end. It's the beginning. The house smelled like rosemary and roasted garlic, warm, comforting, deceptively familiar. My hands, gloved in oven mitts, hovered above the roast like I was blessing it. I'd made this dish for decades, always to quiet acclaim. A standing rib roast with honey-glazed carrots, creamy mashed potatoes with truffle oil, and my signature rosemary rolls. The kind of meal that made people say, "You've really outdone yourself, Delilah." My name is Delilah Hartwell, and I used to think love looked a lot like effort. Maybe it still does. The kitchen buzzed with a soft hum, the dishwasher's low churn, Walter's faint footsteps upstairs, the clink of ice cubes from the bar cart. Family dinner. A Sunday tradition we kept mostly intact, though these days it felt more ceremonial than heartfelt. Like we were all performing a role none of us had auditioned for. Colton had texted earlier in the week, "Let's make this one special, Mom." No explanation. No smiley face or trailing heart. Just that. He was never sentimental. It struck me as strange. But I was his mother, and I told myself not to read too much into things. We were all getting older. Maybe he was turning a corner. Savannah arrived first, floating into the kitchen in her pale, cream wrap dress, smiling that practiced, tight-lipped smile of hers. She smelled faintly of tuberose and something metallic underneath. Her heels tapped deliberately across the floor as she approached, arms already extended for a hug. "You look beautiful, Delilah. That apron is so vintage chic," she said, voice featherlight. I smiled and returned the hug, breathing in the fake warmth. "You look lovely too, sweetheart. That dress suits you." Walter descended a moment later, tucking his phone into his pocket, nodding at both of us. His suit jacket hung too neatly off his shoulders, his cologne a little too sharp for a casual dinner. That was Walter, always composed, always camera-ready. Retirement had only polished his exterior further. To anyone looking in, we were a solid couple. 40 years, 2 children, a nice home, a picturesque life. But I saw the flicker in his eyes when Savannah greeted him a little too warmly. The slow turn of his head as he watched her walk away. He caught me looking. We both smiled and said nothing. Colton walked in last. Late, of course. Always a little bit later than everyone else. His entrance was casual but studied. He kissed Savannah on the temple, nodded toward me with a lazy, "Hey, Mom," and clapped Walter on the back. He looked tired, thinner maybe, but that could have just been the tailored jacket. "Looks like you've gone full Thanksgiving on us," he said, surveying the table. "Just trying to keep tradition alive," I replied, arranging napkins with a little more force than necessary. Bryn hadn't arrived yet, or answered her phone all day. That wasn't unusual. She and Colton had barely spoken in months, not since her book came out. A memoir she never sent me a copy of, and one that apparently ruffled quite a few feathers at the last family brunch. I didn't ask questions. I never asked questions. "Let me help with the wine," Savannah offered, moving swiftly to the cabinet before I could protest. She picked the bottle I'd set aside and uncorked it with practiced ease. She filled glasses methodically, moving from person to person, never spilling a drop. "You've done this before," Walter joked. "Once or twice," she winked. Something about the way Colton's jaw tightened didn't escape me. I set the table, knife blades facing inward like I always taught Bryn. The centerpiece was minimal, white lilies and eucalyptus in a narrow vase. The room gleamed with candlelight. The chandelier dimmed just enough to cast a flattering glow over everything. Picture perfect, sterile. Walter offered a toast. To family, imperfect but ours. Everyone chuckled. I felt something tighten in my throat. We clinked glasses. I watched Savannah sip hers first, eyes locked on mine. I returned the gaze with a smile, my fingers curled tight around the stem of my glass. I didn't drink. Instead, I scanned the table. Colton, lounging back, his tie loosened. Savannah, always alert, always pleasing. Walter, the king of detachment, smirking as though none of this mattered. A well-oiled machine of appearances. The people I had loved most in the world, who each in their own way had learned how to perform affection with terrifying precision. I glanced at the empty chair. Bryn was late. A small part of me still hoped she'd walk through that door. She had always brought chaos and color into our neutral world. Her laugh was loud, her questions pointed, her presence too much for everyone but me. We hadn't spoken since Christmas. I walked to the kitchen under the pretense of checking the roast one last time. My hands shook as I pulled open the drawer for the carving knife. Something wasn't right. Not in the obvious way, not in the way you expect danger to feel, but in the silences between conversations, in the moments someone looked up too quickly or looked away too soon, in Savannah's too smooth gestures, in the way Walter stood a beat too long beside her, in Colton's flinch when I brushed his hand. It was in the subtle choreography of distrust, each movement rehearsed, each smile thinly veiled. I stared at my reflection in the oven's glass door, my hair, freshly styled, my lipstick, perfectly intact. I looked like someone who had it all together, but the knot in my stomach said otherwise. When I returned to the dining room, I noticed something strange. My wine glass had been moved, only slightly, just off from where I left it. Savannah was seated now, her own glass in front of her. Identical, except hers had a faint lipstick mark. Mine didn't. And Colton, he wasn't looking at anyone, just staring at the glass in front of me. Something shifted in the air. Not fear exactly, not yet, but something had begun unraveling. And I, ever the dutiful hostess, sat back down and smiled. It started with a text message. Colton never called, he hadn't for years, but he always sent short, transactional texts when he wanted something. This one came in just after 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. Let's have a special dinner this weekend, just us. I'll bring the wine. Make it good, Mom. No emojis, no smiley faces, not even a love you. And yet something about the phrasing, it unsettled me. There was a warmth he didn't usually bother with, a casual softness that rang false. I stared at the message longer than I should have, rereading it, my thumb hovering over the screen like touching it might reveal something deeper. Walter was reading a financial journal in bed when I showed him. He glanced at it, then at me, and shrugged. Maybe he's turning over a new leaf. Maybe, I murmured, not believing it. Colton didn't host dinners. He barely came over for the ones I cooked, and he certainly never suggested them. Still, I agreed. How could I not? I told myself it was a chance to repair, to reconnect, a moment of unity, however brief. The house was spotless by Thursday. By Friday, it was glowing. I polished the silver, steamed the curtains, rearranged the hydrangeas on the mantel. I made lists and rewrote them. I called Bryn twice, left voicemails. She didn't reply. Saturday morning arrived and brought with it a strange sort of quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. The weather turned unexpectedly humid, and the sky sat overcast and heavy. I put on my pearl earrings, the ones Walter bought me when Colton was born. A symbolic gesture. I hoped it might mean something. Maybe signal to Colton that I still remembered the good parts. I was halfway through seasoning the roast when Savannah arrived, unannounced and hours early. Thought I'd help, she said breezily, letting herself in. She wore a beige sweater set and flawless makeup, hair smoothed to perfection. She looked like a walking lifestyle ad. I hesitated, hands still buried in the spice rack. Help with what? Just thought we could prep together. Bond, you know. That wasn't her way. Savannah didn't offer help, she curated presents. But I smiled and nodded, wiping my hands on a dish towel. She was chatty at first, overly so, asking about the roast, complimenting the china I'd laid out, reminiscing about past dinners I couldn't recall. Then her questions turned sharper. Bryn's not coming, I assume? She asked, voice sugar smooth but eyes sharp. She hasn't responded. Maybe something came up. Savannah nodded, almost smug. She's always had timing issues, hasn't she? Or maybe she's just above all this now. I didn't respond. I didn't take the bait. I never did. By noon, Colton arrived, and the air shifted. He strode in like he owned the place, like the man of the house. Kissing Savannah on the cheek, patting Walter's shoulder, calling me Mom with a tone that bordered on performative affection. He handed me a bottle of Cabernet and said, "Only the best." "You remembered I prefer white," I said, half smiling. He laughed. "Savannah chose it." Of course she did. They slipped away into the hallway together, whispering. I pretended not to notice. But I stood still when I saw Colton pull something from his coat pocket. Small, glass, a vial. It glinted briefly in the hallway light before disappearing into the drawer beneath the wine cabinet. I stood there, unmoving, my hand frozen on the handle of the refrigerator. 1,000 explanations ran through my head. Medicine, essential oils, supplements. But none of them made sense. Not when I remembered the message. Not when I saw Savannah glancing over her shoulder as she returned. "Need help with the wine?" she offered again, her tone chipper. "No," I said quickly. Too quickly. "I've got it," she smiled. Too much teeth. Dinner prep continued like clockwork, the kind of order that only comes with years of repetition. But nothing felt routine. Every moment was slowed, dissected. I watched the way Colton ran his finger along the edge of a knife, the way Savannah double-checked every plate I touched, the way Walter, so still and unreadable, remained at the periphery, never in the way, never involved, but always aware. I sat down briefly while the roast was in the oven. My back ached, but the pain was more than physical. It was the weight of decades, of silence and sacrifice, and knowing something was wrong, but never naming it. A mother knows, but love clouds instinct. That's how I'd survived, by filtering everything through the lens of devotion. It had worked for years, until now. I went to the study to get the nice serving tray, the one we only used for holidays. The door was ajar. I paused. Voices, low, deliberate. Colton and Walter. "Getting it over with tonight. No more hesitating," Colton said. Walter's voice followed, slower, almost amused. "Just make sure you don't fumble it. She's not stupid." My hand froze on the doorknob. "I'm not. It's clean. She won't feel a thing." A long silence. Then Walter again. "You sure about this? You know what's at stake." I'm done being under her thumb. I backed away from the door. Their voices blurred in my ears as I moved back to the kitchen. I leaned against the counter, heart thudding so loud I thought it might echo. The air in the house thickened, like it knew something I didn't. I couldn't process what I just heard, couldn't make sense of it. I wanted to believe they were talking about something else, anything else. But I couldn't forget the vial, or the way Savannah eyed every glass I touched, or Colton's artificial warmth. And Walter. Walter, always composed, always detached. I used to think he was my ally, my ballast. But that wasn't love. That was proximity, control. Bryn had seen it sooner. She'd tried to pull away. She wrote things I couldn't bear to read. And maybe she'd stayed away to protect herself. Or maybe to protect me. Dinner was almost ready. I looked at the wine glass set aside for me. Full, ruby red, poured while I was in the study. I didn't touch it. I went upstairs to reapply my lipstick. In the mirror, my face was pale, my eyes hollow. But there was clarity now, something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't sure what tonight was, a test, a trap, but I wasn't going down easy. I wasn't raised to speak about feelings. I was raised to hide them in fine bone china and polite smiles, to mask pain with etiquette and the proper dress. My mother, Imogen, wore lipstick to funerals and taught me how to curtsy before she taught me how to read. My father, Frank, didn't speak much. He didn't have to. His silence was the punishment. Disappointment was worse than anger in our house. There were rules for everything: how to sit, how to fold napkins, how long to make eye contact, deviate, and you were corrected. Perfection wasn't an expectation. It was a necessity. I learned young how to disappear emotionally, how to shrink my needs into something manageable for others. That was the currency of survival in our family. When I met Walter, I thought I'd found the antidote to all of that. He was charming, articulate, ambitious. He opened doors, paid attention, said the right things at the right times. My parents approved instantly. A future banker, clean record, family pedigree intact. He told me I was classy but not uptight. I took it as a compliment. What I didn't realize, not then, was that Walter didn't love me. He loved what I represented. Poise, reputation, a future that could be sculpted into his vision. And I loved him back with the kind of devotion only a girl raised to please could give. The first year of marriage, he corrected me gently. "You're too emotional. Don't take things so personally. You make people uncomfortable when you overshare." By the third year, I had stopped oversharing. By the fifth, I had stopped sharing altogether. When Colton was born, Walter lit up. Finally, someone to mold. A little boy who could carry his legacy forward. From the beginning, Walter taught him strength meant control. That power was the only true currency in life. When Colton cried, especially if it wasn't from pain, Walter would scoff. "He's fine. Don't coddle him, Delilah." Once, when Colton was 7, he helped a neighbor's son pick up scattered baseball cards. Walter pulled him aside afterward, told him he looked weak doing that. Colton stopped helping after that. He learned quickly. And I stayed quiet. I told myself I was being a good wife, a loyal mother. That Walter's lessons, however harsh, came from a place of preparing our son for a brutal world. Then came Savannah. She was sweetness personified when we first met her. Soft-spoken, eager to please, eyes that flicked to Colton for permission before speaking. At first, I thought she was simply shy, but that wasn't it. She had grown up poor, worked her way through community college, met Colton at a charity fundraiser. Walter adored her from the beginning. She reminded him of himself, I think, hungry and strategic. Under his tutelage, Savannah transformed. She learned the Hartwell way fast. Smile, comply, never challenge. Her sweetness became a weapon. I watched it happen, but again, I said nothing. Maybe part of me thought she'd be safer that way, easier to love, easier to keep. Bryn, on the other hand, had no interest in compliance. She was always electric. Bright, brash, too loud for Walter's liking and too sharp for Colton's comfort. She questioned everything. She loved stories, books, truth. She chose a creative writing program over an Ivy League law path and never looked back. Walter hated that. So did Colton. They called her selfish, immature, ungrateful. I remember Colton sneering once. "What are you even going to do with a degree like that?" She laughed in his face. She didn't come home much after that. When she did, it was strained. She kept to herself, brought boyfriends Walter dismissed before they introduced themselves, and stopped calling me Mom. It was just Delilah by then. The guilt came in waves. I wanted to defend her. I wanted to say, stop every time Walter spoke over her or Colton rolled his eyes. But I didn't. I made excuses. I told myself I was protecting her by keeping peace, that she didn't need me to make things worse. That lie kept me warm for years. But lately, the silence had started to break. I started therapy 6 months ago. Quietly, secretly. My therapist, Jules, has this way of asking questions that feel like peeling skin. Not cruel, but precise. "Who taught you that enduring pain is love?" she once asked. I didn't know how to answer. Or I did. I just couldn't say it out loud. It wasn't until our 10th session that I finally admitted the truth. "I let it happen," I said. "All of it." I stood by while Walter shaped Colton into someone cold and distant. I watched Savannah become someone else just to survive here. I let Bryn drift because it was easier than confronting him. I kept this house beautiful while it rotted from the inside. Jules nodded. "But you see it now. That's the beginning." It doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like an unraveling. The more I see, the less I can pretend. I've started journaling, documenting conversations, pulling apart memories like stitches. I'm noticing things now, like how Walter always praises Savannah's obedience and Bryn's defiance, never her independence. Like how Colton mirrors Walter's tone when he's cornered. And I'm remembering how I taught them all to sit straight, smile kindly, speak softly, even when it hurt. I built a family out of rules and order, and it cost us everything. I don't know how to fix it, but I know this. If something is about to break, I won't pretend to be surprised. There was a stillness to the moment that came just before it began, the kind of hush that hangs before a storm breaks. You can sense it in your bones before your mind catches up. And I felt it then, watching my son pour wine with a trembling hand. Colton wasn't the nervous type. He didn't fumble. He didn't show fear. But as he stood by the sideboard, the dark red liquid filling the crystal glasses, his fingers trembled ever so slightly. His back was to me, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his jaw reflected in the glass of the china cabinet. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the bottle was just heavy. Maybe his arm was tired. Maybe I was imagining things again. But I couldn't look away. He set the bottle down with too much care, almost ceremonially. Then he turned, lifting one of the glasses with deliberate slowness. He walked past Walter, who was pretending to study the roast, past Savannah, who sat already smiling, as if this were a photo op, and then he handed the glass to me. "Thought I'd serve you tonight," he said, voice light, but a beat too high. I accepted it with a smile I had rehearsed since my wedding day. How thoughtful. My fingers curled around the stem. It was colder than I expected. The conversation resumed around us, but it all felt muffled. Savannah laughed too loud at something Walter said, her voice sliding across the room like a knife wrapped in silk. "Delilah, you really have outdone yourself," she said, gesturing to the roast with theatrical admiration. "This is like peak Martha Stewart energy. I'm obsessed." I nodded, feigning gratitude. Her compliments always felt like rehearsed lines in a badly written play. Across the table, Colton had returned to his seat. His eyes flicked toward me, then away, then back again. He was watching me, waiting. I placed the glass gently beside my plate, letting my hand fall away as if I were just caught up in the moment, too distracted to drink just yet. Savannah reached for her own glass. Hers was identical, filled just as high. She lifted it halfway to her lips, then paused to tuck her hair behind her ear. I caught that flicker of hesitation. It was quick, but I saw it. I breathed in, chest tight, time slowed. I reached for my glass. Then, with the smoothness only years of control could give, I leaned slightly to my left, brushing my hand across the tablecloth, laughing at something Bryn said as I shifted the glasses, hers for mine. No one noticed. Savannah's hand was back on her own glass now, except it wasn't hers, it was mine, and I waited. Seconds passed, 10, 15, no one drank. Savannah lowered her glass without sipping. I could feel Colton watching again. Then it happened. Savannah jerked forward, her hand flying to her chest. A soft cough turned sharp, her eyes widened, mouth opening but no sound coming out. Her body stiffened, and the glass slipped from her hand, crashing to the floor. "Savannah!" Colton was on his feet instantly, his voice cracking. "Savannah!" Walter moved, too slow. "Get her air! Someone!" Savannah gasped, eyes rolling back as she collapsed sideways, her body slumping in the chair before sliding to the floor. Bryn's chair screeched across the hardwood. "What the— Oh my God, Colton, move!" I stood frozen, the untouched wine still in front of me. My heartbeat thundered so loudly I could hardly hear. "Call 911!" Bryn shouted. "She's not breathing!" Walter knelt beside Savannah, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. His hands were steady. Too steady. "Delilah!" Bryn snapped. "Phone, now!" I scrambled for my cell, dialing with fingers that barely worked. My voice shook as I relayed the address, the urgency. I could hardly hear what the dispatcher said. Everything had narrowed into chaos. Colton cradled Savannah's head, his hands covered in sweat, tears already streaking down his face. "What happened?" he kept repeating. "What the hell happened?" I watched him, watched them all, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Bryn sat back breathless, whispering something I couldn't catch. Her eyes were locked on the wine glasses, one full, one shattered. The paramedics arrived too fast, and yet too slow. They worked on Savannah right there, on my Persian rug, the one Walter always insisted was too expensive to use. Tubes, wires, fast hands. And then they were gone, sirens blaring into the night. We stood in silence. Colton was shaking. Walter looked dazed. Bryn, her expression was unreadable. I sat. I needed to be still. If I moved, I might fall apart. Colton broke the silence. She wasn't sick. She was fine." "Was she?" Bryn asked quietly. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped. Walter stepped in. "Enough. Let's not turn this into a courtroom." But the atmosphere had changed. The dinner was over, the illusion shattered. We followed the ambulance to the hospital. The ride was quiet except for Colton's breathing and Walter's terse. Instructions to stay calm and not jump to conclusions. The ER waiting room was harshly lit and cold. Time passed in uneven beats, minutes stretched, then collapsed. Finally, a doctor appeared. His face was drawn, his eyes heavy. "She's stable but critical," he said. "There were toxins in her system, a compound we've seen in cases of long-term poisoning." Colton blinked. "Wait, long-term?" The doctor nodded. "This wasn't an acute dose. This has been building over time, possibly weeks." Weeks. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just tonight. This had been happening before dinner, before the glass, before the switch. Someone had already been poisoning her, and whoever it was, they hadn't planned on her surviving. Colton sat back hard in the chair, face pale. "I don't understand." Bryn looked at me then, straight into me. and something unspoken passed between us. The house was quiet again, but not the comforting kind of quiet. It was the sort that settles over a battlefield when the smoke clears. The dinner plate still sat in the sink, crusted over and cold. The roast I spent hours on had gone uneaten, congealed under foil. Every room echoed with what wasn't said. The police came early the next morning. 2 officers, a detective followed shortly after. Suits, solemn faces, a clipboard too thick for comfort. They asked questions. Soft at first, then more direct. What was served? Who poured the drinks? Who touched the glasses? Colton sat stiffly at the kitchen table, arms folded across his chest like a defiant child. His voice was flat, robotic. I poured the wine, yeah. But I didn't do anything else. Why would I hurt my wife? The detective raised an eyebrow. She'd been poisoned over weeks, Mr. Hartwell. This wasn't just a single incident. I didn't know, Colton snapped. I swear I didn't know anything about that. His hands trembled. Walter, ever the practiced diplomat, hovered just outside the conversation, chiming in only when absolutely necessary. They were having marital issues, he offered calmly. It's no secret. Maybe she was unstable. Women get emotional. Perhaps she did it to herself. I nearly choked. Colton looked at Walter like he was a stranger. Are you kidding me? Walter didn't blink. Let's not be dramatic. That was his talent. Erasure by reframing. He was never cruel outright. He just edited reality so carefully you began to question your own memory. Savannah was still unconscious. Stable, they said, but in no state to speak. Toxicology confirmed traces of a compound administered slowly over time. Her liver was deteriorating. Her blood work told stories she hadn't voiced. Someone had been breaking her down while pretending to love her. The police asked for the wine glasses, the drawer where I saw the vial. They asked about my glass, the one I hadn't drunk from, and I answered, calm, poised. I didn't say what I knew. Not yet. Because I didn't understand all of it myself. Not the why or the when, only the what. I had watched my son shake as he poured my drink, and I had watched my husband suggest his daughter-in-law was hysterical rather than endangered. It was Bryn who broke the silence that had cocooned our family for decades. She cornered me in the laundry room, of all places. Amid the scent of detergent and the low hum of the dryer, she exploded. What the hell have you been ignoring all these years? Her voice cracked. Her face was blotchy with fury and something worse, betrayal. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She advanced a step. You knew, Mom. Maybe not the details, but you knew. About Dad, about Colton, about how they treated me, treated Savannah. You knew and you smiled through it. I swallowed. I thought I was keeping the family together. Bryn let out a bitter laugh. No, you were keeping the illusion together. That's not the same thing. She wasn't wrong. Every memory I had of trying to preserve peace flashed before me like a slideshow. Every time I told Bryn to soften her voice, to be less aggressive. Every time I laughed off Colton's barbed jokes or covered for Walter's absences. Every time I hosted dinner like it could fix something that had rotted long ago. I leaned against the washing machine and whispered, I didn't know how to stop it. Bryn looked at me, her expression softening just enough to break me. You still don't, she said. She left me there, surrounded by the ordinary noise of life. Machine cycles, water pipes, the wind pressing against the window. It all sounded so distant. Later, I found myself in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch. My hands clutched the fabric of my dress, knuckles white. I stared at the spot where Savannah had collapsed. The rug had been cleaned, but I could still see it. A ghost stain. Walter walked in, phone in hand, already mid-conversation with someone from the club, laughing, talking about stocks. I wanted to scream, to grab the phone and hurl it across the room. Instead, I said quietly, she could have died. He paused, then looked at me with the same condescension I'd grown used to. And you think hysteria will fix that? Something cracked in me. It wasn't loud. There was no grand scene, no sobbing, but something split down the middle, something I'd spent my whole life trying to keep sealed. I stood, walked past him, didn't look back. That night, I sat alone in the guest room with the door locked, a glass of untouched water beside me. I wrote everything I remembered. I opened a blank notebook and filled 6 pages. Dates, conversations, observations. Emotions I'd stuffed so deep they came up like bile. This was my beginning. The unraveling wasn't the end. It was the only honest thing we'd had in years. It was past midnight when Bryn knocked on my bedroom door. The house was still. Walter asleep in his study, Colton gone, likely pacing the sterile hospital corridors where Savannah lay unconscious. Outside, the wind tapped the windows like it, too, wanted answers. I opened the door and saw Bryn standing there barefoot, arms crossed over an old sweatshirt. Her eyes were tired but resolute. She didn't ask to come in. She just walked past me, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor. "I don't want another dinner table apology," she said. "I don't want polite regret. I want the truth, Mom, all of it." I sat beside her, unsure where to begin. She didn't wait. "I need to tell you what you refuse to hear." I nodded. She looked at me then, and I saw all the years in her eyes. Years I'd missed, years I'd chosen not to see. "I grew up feeling like wallpaper in this house," she said, voice thin but steady. "Pretty to look at, but never noticed unless I clashed with the decor." That stung. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was. Colton was the golden child. He got away with everything. I got lectures for slouching. He broke things, lied, manipulated, and Dad called it strength. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say she was exaggerating, but I had done that before. So I stayed silent. "You always said I was too emotional," she continued, her voice cracking. "You told me I needed to be quieter, gentler, more like Savannah. Do you know how that felt?" Tears pricked my eyes. "I just wanted you to be safe," I said weakly. Bryn laughed. It wasn't cruel, just sad. "No, you wanted me to be manageable. Safe was never an option in this house." She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out her phone. With a few swipes, she handed it to me. "Read this." It was a text thread. Savannah and Bryn. The messages were erratic. One-sided at first, Savannah hesitant. Savannah. "He threw a mug today. It wasn't at me, but close." Bryn. "You need to leave." Savannah. "I can't. He says I wouldn't survive without him. And your mom, she's watching everything. She sees me flinch. She just smiles." Bryn. "That's not fair. She's not like him." Savannah. "You sure about that?" I felt my breath catch. "Why didn't you show me this before?" I asked. "I did, just not the messages. I told you something was wrong years ago, after Thanksgiving, remember?" I did, vaguely. Bryn had cornered me in the kitchen, frantic, saying she thought Colton was hurting Savannah. And I had said, "Don't jump to conclusions. That's a serious accusation." I thought I was protecting my son. I thought I was keeping order. But what I was doing, what I always did, was refusing to look beneath the surface. Bryn wiped her eyes and continued. "Savannah confided in me. Not often, not much, but enough. She was terrified. She said sometimes she felt like she was in a house with no doors." I stared at the screen again, the words blurring. I didn't want to believe it, I admitted. Because if it was true, that meant I'd failed all of you. Bryn took my hand. "You did fail us, but you can still face it now." Her grip was warm, familiar. For the first time in years, I felt it again. That mother-daughter bond, frayed but not severed. The silence between us was softer now, not empty, but filled with things neither of us had words for yet. That night, we slept in the same room, just like we had when she was small and sick and afraid of thunder. She was the strong one now, and I, the woman who once believed her strength was silence, was unraveling beside her. The next morning, while packing Savannah a change of clothes for the hospital, Bryn opened a drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal. She brought it to me without a word. It was Savannah's. We didn't read it all, just the first few pages. The first entry stopped my breath cold. "I think Delilah wants me gone. She watches me like I'm some intruder in her perfect little dynasty. I know she sees what Colton does. She chooses to pretend, which makes her worse, more dangerous. She's the one pulling the strings. I think she wants me broken, dependent, or maybe just silent. Either way, I need a way out." And further down, "If she won't protect me, maybe I need to protect myself first. I've been researching. Something slow, something untraceable. Something to make her weak before she ever sees it coming." My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor. "She thought it was me," I whispered. Bryn sat beside me. "Mom, she was scared. People see monsters where there are ghosts." I shook my head, tears hot and fast. She thought I was the mastermind, the puppet master. She feared me more than Colton. I think you scared her because you reminded her of what she could become. We sat like that for a long time, surrounded by silence, surrounded by truth, a mother, a daughter, and the long shadow of a house that had raised them both to swallow what hurt and smile through the burn. I couldn't sleep after reading Savannah's journal. Even after Bryn drifted off beside me, her breathing slow and even, my mind whirred like a machine that wouldn't power down. Savannah had feared me, thought I was the one pulling strings, orchestrating her unraveling. But fear doesn't always find the right face. Sometimes it points to the nearest one, the quietest one, the one who watches instead of acts. And yet, there were things in her words that didn't quite fit. Descriptions, accusations, implications I couldn't reconcile with what I knew of myself. No matter how much I'd ignored or failed to act, I hadn't been the architect. But someone had been. The next morning, I went back into the study. Walter's domain. Once it had been my sanctuary too, back when we shared dreams instead of power. Now, it was a museum of control. Polished bookshelves, locked drawers, cabinets that opened only with exact pressure and subtle force. I started searching methodically without hurry, as if I had every right. And I did. In the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath a false lining I only found because of the way the felt peeled slightly at one corner, I discovered a small USB drive. It was unlabeled, no folder names, just a list of dates. Dozens of them. I plugged it into my laptop and hit play on the first file. Savannah's voice, breathless, whispers, fragments. He said, if I don't keep Colton in line, things will get worse. He thinks I'm the only one Colton listens to anymore. Delilah won't suspect anything. She never does? Then Walter's voice, calm, assured, poison in velvet. You're doing fine, sweetheart. Just keep him focused. He can't spiral if he thinks you're on his side. And Delilah, don't worry about her. She needs to feel safe. Helpless even. Let her think she's still the queen. My skin crawled. Another file, Colton's voice slurred, angry. You're the reason she doesn't look at me the same anymore. You turned her into this weapon. Walter. No, son, I showed her how to survive you. Big difference. Recording after recording, the truth came undone like stitches from old cloth. Walter had been pulling strings for years. He had fed Savannah half-truths to control Colton. Used Colton's volatility to keep Savannah fearful and compliant, encouraged her to manipulate me, gaslighted us all into paralysis. And Savannah, she hadn't just feared me out of paranoia. Walter had framed me, carefully, repeatedly, with just enough misdirection to make me look like the quiet architect of her pain. Even the poisoning, the slow deterioration of her health. Walter, in one of the later recordings, she's breaking down. Perfect. It's cleaner this way. Let the tension point to Colton. The boy's always been emotionally reckless. They'll believe it. Savannah's collapse will be the spark. Delilah won't recover from it. She'll fade, like she was always meant to. He didn't say it with malice. He said it with planning, precision, like it was a campaign, a strategy. And I, his wife of 40 years, had been the final pawn in his game. I sat back, numb, staring at the laptop screen. I had the truth now, tangible, irrefutable. I slipped the USB drive into my coat pocket and walked downstairs. Walter was in the kitchen, fixing tea, humming some old jazz tune he used to play when we were younger. His back was to me. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the mundane normalcy of it all. Then I spoke, voice clear, steady. Was it always the plan to kill her slowly? He froze. His hand hovered over the kettle. Then he turned, eyes calm, calculating. Delilah. Don't, I said. Don't use my name like we're still playing house. He exhaled through his nose, set the kettle down. I assume you've been digging. Savannah recorded everything. He didn't deny it, of course he didn't. I was trying to save us, he said softly. You don't see what I see. The chaos our children brought into this home. The threats, the disobedience. Colton lost control. Bryn, he scoffed, is a liability. Savannah, unstable. And me? I asked. You, he said, stepping closer, were the only one I needed to protect. But you wouldn't listen. You kept opening doors, so I had to close them. The bile rose in my throat. You poisoned her. It was measured, controlled, just enough to create doubt. She wasn't supposed to collapse at the dinner table. That was Colton's impatience, his desperation to outmaneuver me. He thought he was taking control back. He smiled. I had it handled. But now it's out of our hands. I stared at the man I'd built a life with. The man I'd chosen, protected, rationalized. You used all of us. No, he said simply. I led. You were all just too soft to see it. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and turned the screen toward him. The voice memo had been recording the entire time. Walter's expression didn't change. I have recordings, I said. Of you, of Savannah, of everything. You think anyone will believe you? He asked, still composed. You've played housewife for so long, Delilah. You don't even know who you are without me. I stepped forward. I do now. And for the first time in years, I watched him blink. Just once. A fracture. I turned, walked out of the kitchen, and closed the door behind me. I handed the USB drive to the detective 2 days later. I didn't rehearse what to say. I simply placed it in his palm, met his eyes, and said, "Everything you need is on here." I didn't ask for protection. I didn't ask what would happen next. I just walked out of the precinct and into the gray afternoon, the air cooler than it had been all week. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. The arrest came quietly. Walter had just finished shaving when they knocked on the door. He opened it in his robe, face expressionless. The officers didn't shout. No cuffs in the driveway. Just a calm reading of rights and a single bag packed under their supervision. He didn't look back at me as they led him away. The media didn't catch wind. There was no circus, only silence, and a lingering coldness that settled into the walls of the house like mildew. Colton was called in for further questioning, but the investigators, armed now with Walter's voice, Walter's plans, had enough to draw a line through him for the time being. He was released that evening, his face drawn and pale. He didn't call, didn't come by, just disappeared into the ether. Bryn didn't hesitate. She showed up the next day with a duffel bag and a grocery sack full of books. "I'm not letting you sit in this mausoleum alone," she said, dumping her things in the guest room without ceremony. We started small. We boxed up Walter's clothes, first his suits, then his trophies, his monogrammed whiskey tumblers. We didn't speak while we worked. We just folded and packed and taped. A quiet reckoning. His presence retreated piece by piece. Photographs came next. Not all of them, just the ones that felt like propaganda. Family portraits where the smiles were stiff, eyes vacant. I burned those in the backyard fire pit. Bryn stood beside me, watching as the edges curled and blackened, the past reduced to ash. We repainted the rooms. Pale blues replaced Walter's grays, soft whites where the walls had once been sterile beige. Bryn picked a warm terracotta for the hallway, something I would have rejected before. Too bold. But it glowed at sunset, and that was enough. Therapy no longer happened in secret. We went together once a week, sitting side by side on the same velvet couch where I had once whispered my guilt into cupped hands. Bryn spoke more now. Her voice was steady, her insight sharp, and I was learning to talk without choking on shame. "I spent years being numb," I told Jules once. "Now every feeling is loud." "That's what healing sounds like," she said. I started cooking again. Not grand dinners, just simple things. Soup, cornbread, recipes that didn't demand applause. Bryn and I ate in the breakfast nook with our elbows on the table, laughing about nothing. I began keeping a journal, not a record of facts, but of feelings, things I'd never let myself say out loud. It was clumsy at first, but with each page I reclaimed language I'd long buried. The house began to feel less like a theater stage and more like a place where people lived. Then, 3 weeks after Walter's arrest, Colton appeared. It was late afternoon and the front door creaked open without a knock. Bryn was in the garden. I was folding laundry. I heard the door and felt my heart spike before I even saw his face. He looked thinner, unshaven, not broken, but cracked in the way only someone betrayed from all directions could be. "I didn't do it," he said, without greeting. "I need you to believe that." I set the laundry basket down. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue. He unfolded it slowly, revealing a vial. I found this in Savannah's jewelry box, he said, tucked behind some old brooches. It's the same kind Walter used on her. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. What is this, Colton? She was planning something, he said. She didn't trust him. She didn't trust any of us. Bryn came in then, dirt on her hands, brows furrowed. She was going to poison Dad? I don't know, Colton said. But it wasn't me. I was scared that night. I was trying to make her stop, not kill her. There was no fury in his voice, just exhaustion. She changed when she married me. But I think she was just surviving, just like the rest of us. I nodded slowly. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. But belief didn't undo everything. Belief didn't fix the lies or the bruises or the years lost in silence. Still, it was something. He stayed for tea. We didn't talk much. He cried once, quietly over the rim of his cup. I didn't touch him. I let him cry like a man who had never been allowed to weep. When he left, he hugged Bryn. She let him. Then he turned to me. I don't know how to fix anything, he said. You don't have to, I replied. Just don't pretend anymore. And with that, the door closed behind him. We didn't set out to rebuild anything. There was no grand announcement, no teary vow to start over. That's not how healing works, not in real life. It begins quietly, in conversations that hesitate before landing, in gestures that feel strange at first, in forgiveness that's more survival than sanctification. Bryn and I started small, reconstructing the past, not to relive it, but to reframe it. In therapy, over coffee, during long walks through the neighborhood, we talked about the unspoken rules of our household, about the performance of grace, about how silence wasn't peace, about how I had inherited more than I ever realized, and passed it down without meaning to. I thought I was protecting you, I told her one day, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile. But what I really did was train you to disappear. She nodded. I didn't disappear. I just stopped trying to be seen by people who wouldn't look. Her words didn't sting. They clarified. And in that clarity, I began to see Colton differently. He called once a week now, briefly, carefully. Always with a heaviness in his voice. The cockiness was gone, the arrogance stripped away. What remained was something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Uncertainty. The first time he visited after Walter's arrest, he sat on the back porch with me in silence for 20 minutes before saying, I don't know who I am without him. I didn't respond at first. I just let him say it. He stared out at the garden. Everything I thought made me strong was him, his rules, his approval, his anger. Without that, I'm just noise. I reached for his hand. I used to wonder what happened to the boy who brought me wildflowers from the backyard, I said. The one who sobbed when the neighbor's dog died, who asked me if clouds got sad. He didn't meet my eyes. He's not gone, I added. He was just trained to be silent. That night, I went through an old photo album. Not the curated family ones, the real ones. I found a picture of Colton, age 5, covered in mud, cradling a frog like it was a sacred thing. Another, him sitting beside Bryn on Halloween, handing her the bigger candy bar from his stash. He had been kind once, empathetic. He wasn't born cruel. He was born reachable. But somewhere along the way, Walter taught him that vulnerability was shameful, that empathy was failure. And I, too scared to confront either of them, let that lesson stick. A week later, Colton called with a strange proposal. Can we do dinner? Just us. Me, you and Bryn. No expectations. I hesitated, but said yes. We kept it simple. Grilled chicken, a tossed salad, roasted potatoes. Bryn chopped vegetables while Colton set the table. I watched them from the kitchen window as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden wash over everything. No raised voices, no passive remarks, just quiet cooperation. When we sat down to eat, no one gave a toast. There were no forced smiles, just forks and plates and stories. Colton shared that he was in therapy, that his counselor had challenged him to trace his anger, not just its targets, but its source. It was always Dad, he said, but it was also the way I thought love had to be earned. Bryn looked at him for a long time before replying. You hurt people, she said plainly. Savannah, me, Mom. He nodded. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just trying to figure out how not to be that person anymore. Silence followed, But it wasn't tense. It was necessary. After dinner, we sat on the porch again. Bryn lit candles. Colton brought out tea. I wrapped myself in an old quilt, watching them laugh. Awkward, unsure, but real. It was the first time in decades that the house didn't feel like it was performing. We weren't healed. Not completely. Maybe not even mostly. But we were willing. And that, I was learning, was more important than being perfect. Later, I stood alone in the kitchen, rinsing dishes under warm water. I glanced at the empty wine rack, at the place where I had once stood, fingers wrapped around a glass I knew not to drink. I turned off the faucet, listened to the quiet hum of my home. This was the family I was learning to recognize. Not the one built on appearances, but the one forged, slowly, painfully, tenderly, from truth. It came in a small white envelope with no return address, slid through the mail slot on a rainy Tuesday morning. The handwriting was hers, elegant, rounded, unmistakably Savannah. Bryn found it first, half buried under grocery flyers and catalogs. She stood in the kitchen with it in her hand, eyes wide, lips parted. "Mom," she said softly, "it's from her." Inside was a flash drive, labeled in simple black ink, for Bryn and Delilah. We didn't speak, just moved in sync, plugging it into the laptop on the kitchen table. The screen flickered once before stabilizing, and there she was, Savannah. Her face filled the frame. Not the polished public version. No perfect eyeliner, no styled curls. Just a sweatshirt, damp eyes, and vulnerability so raw it felt like trespassing. She spoke softly. "I don't know if this will find you after I'm gone, or if I'll ever send it, but I had to record something. Because I don't think anyone knows what it feels like to be owned." She exhaled, steadying herself. "When I married into your family, I thought I was stepping into security. Colton was charming. Walter was powerful. Delilah, you were elegant and terrifying in a way I couldn't name. I thought maybe if I played it right, I'd become part of something bigger than me." She paused. But I didn't become anything. I disappeared. The silence that followed those words was thick and trembling. Colton changed after our first year, got colder, meaner. I thought it was stress. Then I thought it was me. Then I stopped thinking altogether. Her eyes glistened. I stayed because Walter said I was the glue. He said Colton was spiraling and I was the only one who could anchor him. And when I asked if I should leave, he smiled and said, "Why would you leave the only people who'll ever understand you?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. She looked straight at us through the screen. "Delilah, I blamed you for a long time. Thought you were the silent hand behind it all. The way you watched, stayed so composed, it scared me. I didn't understand your stillness. I thought it meant consent." Her mouth trembled. "I'm sorry. I know now you were surviving too. I know you were just as trapped, maybe worse." She turned slightly, as if speaking to Bryn now. "I never wanted to hurt you. You were the only real voice I had in that house. You saw me, and I pushed you away because Walter told me you were dangerous, that your questions would ruin everything." She blinked slowly, tears falling unchecked. "I started keeping poison in the house, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I needed a way out, a way to feel like I still had choices, like I could protect myself, even if only in theory." She smiled, broken. "I don't know how this ends, but I hope you both find each other again. I hope you start over." The screen went black. I couldn't breathe. For the first time since the dinner, the tears came like a flood. I dropped my head into my hands and sobbed, loud, unfiltered grief, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to feel in 40 years, because in that moment, I understood something with crystalline clarity. Every woman in this family had been groomed for silence. Savannah, Bryn, even me. We were all daughters of the same invisible war, a war waged in words left unsaid, in control masquerading as care, in men who played gods and women who learned how to disappear. Bryn wrapped her arms around me. We didn't speak, just held on. Later that evening, after we'd cleaned up the tissues and closed the laptop, I found another envelope. This one was different. Unmarked. Thin. No return address. Inside was a single slip of paper. Typed. No signature. "You were never supposed to live through that dinner. They all had a part." My blood ran cold. I stared at the words, my body stiffening with a fear I thought I'd already faced and survived. Bryn read it over my shoulder. Her face hardened. "What the hell does this mean?" she whispered. I didn't answer, because deep down I didn't know. Walter was in custody. Colton was trying to change. Savannah was gone. But someone else had been watching. Someone else had known. Maybe it was a bluff, a cruel joke. Or maybe the truth hadn't finished surfacing yet. Maybe the roots went deeper than any of us had realized. And maybe survival hadn't been the end of the story. Maybe it was just the beginning. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday. The realtor was polite and brisk, her clipboard full of numbers and phrases I had no emotional space for. Curb appeal, market trends, high ceilings. I nodded through the walkthrough, saying nothing as she complimented the tile in the foyer, the layout of the formal dining room. The house was a fortress of performance, but to me, it was hollow now, just walls that had held too many secrets. I didn't tell her that the kitchen had once been a stage for quiet violence, that the fireplace mantel was lined with photographs I had burned, that beneath the floorboards of the master bedroom, the ghost of silence still curled around old rage. I signed the paperwork, handed over the keys, and walked away without turning back. The hotel room I rented was modest, clean, temporary, but in that impermanence, I found something close to peace. Bryn helped me move what little I chose to keep, my journals, a few books, a blanket she'd knitted in college that I'd once dismissed as too loud but now clung to like armor. She stayed for a week, then left to begin something of her own. "I'm starting a group," she told me over lunch, "for women like me, daughters who grew up with fathers like him, mothers like you." I didn't flinch at the wording. "I want them to know they're not crazy," she continued, "that it wasn't just them." I nodded. "Tell them I'm sorry." "You tell them," she said. So I did. I started anonymously. A Poisoned Matriarch. That was the name I chose for the blog. I wrote about things I'd never said aloud. About being the woman who stood still while others burned. About mistaking endurance for loyalty. About how easy it was to believe silence was strength. The words poured out, clumsy at first, then fluid. I wrote at night, wrapped in that loud blanket, sipping chamomile as the world outside fell quiet. The posts were raw, imperfect, true, and people read them. At first, a trickle, one or two anonymous comments, then more. This could be my mother. I thought I was the only one who stayed quiet to keep peace. "Thank you for saying it out loud." Messages came from everywhere. Women in their 60s, girls in their 20s, mothers, daughters, even sons, all carrying their own variations of silence, waiting for someone to name it. Colton reached out once a month. Brief emails, no excuses, just updates. Sober 91 days, still going. Started a new job at a mechanic shop. It's quiet, I like it. Therapist says I should learn to cook. Any suggestions? Read your last post. I knew it was you. I'm sorry for what I was. I'm still trying. I didn't always reply, but I always read. Sometimes we are no longer meant to be family in the way we were taught. Sometimes we become something else. Parallel lives, cautiously orbiting the same wound, healing in different languages. I kept walking, literally. There was a trail behind the hotel, a path that wound through an old forest preserve. I took it every morning, rain or shine. The trees were ancient, twisted, and wild, like they had survived everything the world could throw at them and decided to keep growing anyway. I didn't wear makeup anymore. I didn't wear the clothes Walter had loved on me. Tailored blouses, tight skirts, jewelry that made a statement. Now, it was jeans and flannel, boots that could survive mud, a ponytail, unpolished nails. And I breathed, not shallowly, not carefully, but fully, the kind of breathing that fills you all the way down to your feet. On those walks, I began to feel my body again, not as a vessel of presentation, but as mine. Sometimes I brought my journal, sat on a moss-covered bench, wrote about things like anger, like desire, like what it means to take up space unapologetically. I wasn't trying to become someone new. I was returning to someone who had never had the chance to live. The kitchen smelled like rosemary again. But this time it wasn't a performance. There was no perfectly plated roast, no crystal wine glasses, no hidden tension waiting to snap. Just a pot of herb-roasted chicken simmering on the stove, mashed potatoes cooling on the counter, and a single pie Bryn had insisted on baking from scratch, apple, with a crumbling oat top that made the whole room smell like fall. The table was set simply. 2 mismatched plates, a candle flickering between them, short and stubby, wax running down the side like it didn't care about looking neat. 1 year had passed, not marked by anniversaries or formal grief, just by change, measured in quiet choices, hard conversations, days survived. I looked across the table at Bryn. Her hair was longer now, her smile unguarded. She laughed as she sliced the pie too generously, placing a mountain of it on each of our plates. "I'll regret this tomorrow," she said, already digging in. "I'll remind you," I replied. We ate slowly, talked about little things, the stubborn client she was mentoring, a book I'd loved as a girl that I was rereading. We even debated if whipped cream counted as a dairy serving. The ordinariness of it made my chest ache in the best way. There were no missing chairs. No one expected a surprise arrival. This was not a table set for reconciliation or performance. It was set for truth. After dinner, we cleared the plates together. She washed. I dried. Then we sat back down, just us and the candle, flickering low. Bryn reached into her bag and pulled out something I hadn't expected, a photograph. Savannah, her face in profile, half lit by sunlight. She looked younger, free. The Savannah before Walter's words, before Colton's coldness, before the walls had closed in. "I found it in her journal," Bryn said. "I thought we should have it, just remember her like this." I held the photo gently. It trembled slightly in my fingers. "She was trying to survive," I whispered. "She deserved more than survival," Bryn said. We sat with the weight of that for a while. "I miss her," I finally admitted. Not the version I knew in this house, but the pieces of her I glimpsed when she let her guard down. The girl who loved cardinals, who used to hum when she cooked, who wore socks that never matched. Bryn smiled sadly. "She told me once that you scared her. Not because you were cruel, because you never cracked. She thought that kind of control was dangerous." I nodded. It was, for both of us. We poured 2 glasses of water, no wine, no facades. We raised them, an unspoken toast to Savannah, to who she might have become, to who we were still becoming. "To truth," I said. Bryn added, "and to not inheriting silence." We clinked the glasses together gently. After she left that night, I didn't cry. I sat by the window instead, watching the trees sway in the wind, the same ones that lined the trail I walked every morning. Their branches were bare now, winter pressing in, but they stood firm, still reaching. I thought about what family really meant, not blood, not tradition, not the curated perfection we once played at. Family was this: honesty over ritual, space over obligation, truth over peacekeeping. It was laughing without fear, crying without shame, sitting at a table without wondering who was watching or waiting to strike. And it was choice, to stay, to love, to try again. I went to bed early, wrapped in the loud blanket Bryn had made, still wearing the sweater I'd cooked in. No mascara, no performance, just me. And in that quiet, as I closed my eyes, the final words came, not for anyone else but for myself. I lost a son, a husband, a false self. But I found a daughter, my voice, and a second chance. If you've ever swallowed the truth to keep the peace, this story was written in your language. For every daughter who questioned, every mother who stayed too long, and every silence mistaken for love, there's more beneath the surface. Keep walking with us. Some ghosts don't vanish until they're named. Subscribe to support stories that speak the unspeakable.